Good evening and welcome to the conversations on urbanization. Today we have a very, very important subject, the lessons that we can learn from the Chennai floods. And I can't think of a better person than Mr. Vikram Kapur, who is Municipal Commissioner and Principal Secretary, Corporation of Chennai. Mr. Kapur is someone whom I've known for the last 10 years and hold in very, very high regard. I have learned a great deal on challenges of urbanization, urban governance from him. He's a Delhi boy who studied in Springdale's and St. Stephen's and then joined the IAS and has held some very, very important positions. I believe the profile of the speaker has been circulated, but still I would like to say that he was MD and CEO of the Tamil Nadu Urban Development Fund, which is one of those institutions which we keep recommending to all the other states. They played a very, very constructive and proactive role in urbanization in Tamil Nadu. He was Member Secretary of the Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority, Chairman of Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board, and now Principal Secretary Industries Department and Commissioner Corporation for Chennai. I can't think of anyone better than Vikram to tell us how we can avoid these situations. As I was telling him, reading the newspapers, we all find that they have done an absolutely terrific job of responding to the crisis, and that is very heartening. But what I want him to focus on is how we can avoid getting into these situations, and in particular, since many of us believe, and I'm sure he agrees, that this was not just nature's fury, but it was something which could be avoided if we had planned how to live with our rivers in our cities. So other cities are now looking to see what they can do so that they don't face similar situations. So with these words, as I mentioned to you, Vikram, our pattern is that we give about 10 minutes to the speaker and then the remaining 45 minutes for discussion. But given that, you know, this is something in which you bring so much from experience, and then you're going to tell us what we can do to avoid, perhaps if you could take maybe 15 to 18 minutes, but do leave enough time so we can raise questions and get answers. Thank you.
Respected Dr. Ahluwalia, Director IHC, distinguished members of this audience. First and foremost, my thanks to ICRIER as well as IHC for giving me this wonderful opportunity. This would be my first presentation after the Chennai floods. I appreciate that we are short on time, but this is a story that needs to be told. Although I'll try to be as brief as possible and rush through most of my presentation, it's important because we need to set the perspective before we start talking about why this happened and what needs to be done to prevent such disasters, because every disaster is a big lesson, and particularly when we're talking of cities like Chennai, it requires a great deal of deliberation. So I'll start without any further delay. These are just the facts about Chennai, but what's important is that this is one of the unique cities in India, maybe in the world, which is blessed to have as many as 3 rivers, not 1, 2, but 3 rivers, a major canal, and several other water bodies that dot its landscape. And to add to this, we have a marsh. Very few cities in the world today can boast of this kind of a geographical bounty. In terms of the drainage of the city, what's important to note is that just 1/3 of the city's streets or roads are actually drained out by a stormwater drain network. In fact, if you see the map, the darker portion is the core city, which was in existence till 2011, and the greener part is what was added to the city post 2011, what we call the extended areas. And what's important to note is that the extended area has virtually no stormwater drain network. Whatever exists is in the core city. The average rainfall is just about 96 centimeters, and as you may know, most of our rainfall comes from the northeast monsoon, which is typically October to December. This year, the monsoon was exceptional, unprecedented, if I may say so. If you see this graph, it indicates the days on which we had rainfall. Excessive rainfall is indicated by the color red. But as you can see, there were at least every week one episode of heavy rainfall in the range of above 12 centimeters. For us, anything above 12 centimeters is heavy rainfall. And the worst was the deluge, the episode that happened on the 1st and 2nd of December, which caused massive flooding, where something more than 30 centimeters of rainfall, which never happened in the history of Chennai, took place. As I mentioned, November of last year was the wettest month ever, and we beat all records. The rainfall on the 1st and 2nd was exceptionally high. But what's important is that not just Chennai alone, but the suburbs of Chennai. And I indicate this map to show that the entire suburbs of Chennai, covering the districts of Kanjipuram and Tiruvallur, is completely dotted with water bodies, lakes, reservoirs, canals. So much so that all the water that fell into this catchment area actually flowed through these three rivers of Chennai. And there were areas in our outlying areas which got as much as 45 to 50 centimeters of rainfall. And all that water actually was responsible for the flooding of Chennai. Just an imagery to show how these water bodies, which are shown in the dark on the left, and the inundation that happened in Chennai city, which is in the pink, just to show that how this impacted at the time of floods. Just to give you a sample of what, let's say, one of the subbasins of the river Adyar. Adyar is our main river, apart from Kuam and Kosas Talyar. The Adyar river was, I think, the one which caused the maximum damage during the floods. And if you see the portion rounded, that's actually just the Adyar river. But what's important is that the entire water bodies that are there around Adyar, these water bodies actually caused the maximum rainfall. It provided the maximum damage to the city. I just want to highlight this particular water body, which is called the Chembarambakam Lake. Of those of you who've been following up the news, this was the lake, the release of whose water actually was responsible in large measure to the flooding that happened. So this lake overflowed, as did all these water bodies, and all the water went through the Adyar and flooded the entire city. I couldn't resist putting this small map, which I picked up from somewhere. It's nearly a 100-year-old map and shows what Chennai used to look like. And all this area is today one of the densest developed areas in Chennai. And it used to, in those days, be one tank and some paddy fields perhaps. And the only habitations were to the east of it. Why I'm showing this is that most of our cities have developed on agricultural lands, and these lands typically used to be either water bodies or agricultural fields. A lot of people have said whether there was enough planning done in anticipation. And I keep saying that we do plan, but then nobody can plan for a flood. The city's disaster plan had actually, for the first time ever in its history, done detailed micro mapping of all the possible inundation areas based on past episodes, and detailed plans had been put in place and implemented, down to where all to keep the pump sets, what all assets to be deployed, what all manpower to be required. All this was done, and all measures were taken. Periodic meetings were conducted at all levels, A flood control room was set up. For the first time ever, communication was given importance, and more than 1,000 wireless sets were given to all the field functionaries. And because of this planning, when we had rains in November, periodically, heavy rains, every time the city came back to normalcy within a day or two. And that's no mean achievement, because for those who lived in Chennai, in the past, the city used to be underwater for several days on end. This time, in the entire month of November, every time it rained and heavily, the city was able to come back to normalcy because of all the disaster planning that had gone into the northeast monsoon. However, the last episode of the 1st and 2nd of December was actually something which was beyond anybody's control, beyond any disaster plan, and as many as 859 places in the city were heavily inundated. The meteorological department did forecast very heavy rains, but as in the case of any such forecast, it never quantifies in terms of how many centimeters. It will always say heavy, very heavy, extremely heavy, isolated, sporadic, these kind of terms. Therefore, we never knew that there would be rainfall of this magnitude. However, heavy rainfall did happen. As a result, all our reservoirs, which were already full due to the November monsoons, were already surplusing. So the PWD, which maintains almost all these reservoirs, actually sounded a warning that they would be discharging water from Chembrambakam and other reservoirs, because these reservoirs are all full and they had to discharge whatever was being received. So throughout the day, the 1st of December onwards, the warning was sounded, and the collector and the police started warning the riverbank slums and colonies to move to higher ground, and simultaneously the discharge in the Adyar kept getting stepped up to as much as 29,000 cusecs by the evening. This rainfall continued the whole night into the 2nd of December with extremely heavy inflows, and Chembrambakam actually accounted for about 40% of the water in Adyar. It's estimated about 60% came from other reservoirs. Similarly, the other rivers, namely Kosasdalyar and Kuam, they also got heavy discharge from these reservoirs. The major canals like Buckingham Canal also overflowed. So you had a situation where practically the entire city, which is crisscrossed by these canals and rivers, got inundated because of this flood, including the airport, the pictures of which you saw on television. By 3rd of December, almost the entire city had been flooded, including those areas which had never in living memory seen floods. Low-lying areas in some places had floods which reached up to the 1st or even 2nd level of the buildings. Most of the arterial roads, the subways, there are 22 of them, they were completely flooded. The electricity board had no other option but to switch off the power supply. The public transport naturally was severely affected, so were other civic services. More importantly, communication networks were down. Our call center was affected. There was water in the call center. All essential commodities naturally was disrupted. Water supply, sewerage systems all affected. It was chaos. In a typical flood, these are the stages that normally happen. And this is classical disaster management. First rescue, followed by relief, then removal of inundation, then you go in for cleanup of the garbage, disease prevention follows, then you go for rehabilitation, and then restoration. In terms of rescue, as news came in of this heavy discharge, we sent out an SOS for the Army and the NDRF, and they responded pretty quickly. But for the first day, we were left on our own. Chennai Corporation is not a specialized rescue agency, so we had to take the help of the state police and fire services, and they did a sterling job along with our people. On the first night itself, we were able to evacuate over 30,000 people from the banks of the river Adyar, including officers from the top to the bottom level were camping the whole night, evacuating people. The NDRF and Army came in the next day because they were deployed in the neighboring district of Kanjipuram and Tambaram areas. But with their help, from 2nd December onwards, rescue operations continued. We had support from the Air Force, the Coast Guard in terms of chopper support despite all the weather conditions. The fishermen and the volunteers did a fantastic job in helping out in times of distress, because there was no way that the Army, NDRF or the state police could reach out to everyone. By 3rd September, our estimate is 1.2 lakh people actually got evacuated. 62,000 of them stayed in our relief camps, nearly 200 of which were set up by us. The rest stayed with their relatives or went out of the city. And what's important to note is because of these efforts, there were hardly any casualties. There is one more issue. There were a large number of people calling, not just from the country but from abroad, because they wanted to know what had happened to their relatives. Communications were all down, so all the calls were landing up in our helpline. We normally receive about 200 to 300 calls a day. We were flooded with 12,000, 13,000 calls. The whole system crashed. These are just some visuals to show the fantastic rescue efforts that were done by our armed forces as well as the state police and fire services. So I'll quickly skip these for want of time, but just to give you a glimpse of what all the city went through. As I said, the next phase after rescue is relief. The state government swung into action. We provided food on a very massive scale, water, milk, bread, etc. An unprecedented 1.28 crore food packets were cooked and distributed through the famous Amma canteens, which you've all heard about. We made nearly 4,000 water tanker trips a day and gave bottled waters to the public who were not able to access water because there was no power. Milk, powder, sanitary napkins were supplied. Medical services and free medicines were given through corporation and government doctors through various camps. This is just some pictures of these relief centers that we set up. In fact, if you see, we actually went colony by colony distributing food apart from the relief centers that we set up. We also set up a centralized relief material processing center because the government of India had contacted a lot of corporates and they had started sending material. And within 24 hours, the relief center was operational, and this material was systematically sorted, packed, and sent out to the needy areas with the help of, again, NDRF and Army. Nearly, it's estimated, 1,648 metric tons of relief material was systematically reached out to most badly affected areas. Here, I would like to again mention the role played by NGOs and corporates who pitched in with all these rations, as well as clothes, bedding, and toiletries, which typically government agencies are unable to provide. And NGOs actually came up under a banner with this hashtag, which helped to actually coordinate this effort. A lot of volunteers helped us in the relief center at Nehru Stadium. This is just some pictures of this stadium, along with the volunteers who helped us out in a big way. We also carried out a massive survey at a short time of all the affected families, and the state government for the first time was able to transfer minimum 5,000 rupees through direct cash transfer to the bank accounts of nearly 14 lakh families without any intermediaries and without any hitch. The state also announced that textbooks, notebooks, and school uniforms would be given to all the students. Special camps were organized to provide duplicate copies of documents that were lost. Automobile servicing camps were organized because most people had lost their vehicles, and free bus transport was ordered immediately after the deluge for 1 week. The Chennai Corporation, along with all the other departments like Metro Water, Fire, Metro Rail, and PWD, we cleared water stagnation within a week. The number of pump sets, JCBs, fire tenders are all put up here, but this kind of a mobilization would not have been possible had we not planned in advance. But this was not enough, so we had to get motor pump sets airlifted even from here, from Delhi, and from other areas. But it was a very, very uphill task because when the river waters are flowing at a higher level, there is no way that you can pump out water. So we had to wait for the water levels to recede before pumping could be effective. Water was continuously flowing from overflowing tanks even several days after the deluge on 1st and 2nd of December. So it created certain stubborn areas which took some time for water to be receded. These are some pictures again of the massive pumping effort that was undertaken by the corporation. Of course, there were fallen trees, but most of this happened in November. Blissfully, in December, we didn't have much of fallen tree problems, but these were again cleared in record time. The next phase after any such disaster, after the waters recede, is that people who've lost their belongings or which have been damaged by floods, they tend to put out all their household goods or their trade articles. And we had a flood of a different nature. There were huge amount of garbage that was being thrown out into the streets. So our 25,000 workers were not good enough. A lot of them themselves had been marooned, so they were not reporting for duty. So we had to mobilize workers, nearly 16,000 from the rest of the state. We got nearly 400 trucks, 120 JCBs, and continuously for several days on end, we systematically removed over 2.19 lakh metric tons of garbage, which was almost double what we normally used to do. And all sanitary workers, they were provided with protective gear. They were given 2,000 rupees each as cash compensation, as ordered by our Honorable Chief Minister. All workers were given tetanus vaccination, and I'm proud to say that this would count as one of the fastest ever cleanups in the history of floods. Just some pictures of the kind of challenges we faced. The other bigger challenge that we had to face was preventing disease. Everybody told us, you are going to sit on an epidemic after this. There will be diarrheal diseases, cholera, there could be leptospirosis, after that you could have things like dengue and all. Thank God, till date, there is not a single episode of epidemic in the city. How we did it? Massive street level disinfection using bleaching powder, lime, cleaning up of homes, their sumps, chlorination of every possible water source, intensive IEC activities to promote hygiene, things like water boiling, washing your hands, etc. We organized medical camps like no tomorrow. 12,000 plus medical camps organized in a period of about a month and a half. And nearly 17.5 lakh people treated in these camps with free medicines for even basic things like fever, diarrhea, or skin rash. As a result of these efforts, I'm proud to say that the singular biggest achievement of the government has been that there has been no outbreak of disease post the worst floods ever. Just some snapshots of these static and mobile camps that we organized and the cleanup that was done by our workers. Massive effort done by our workers, and I'm proud of them. The next phase in any such kind of a flood relief effort is rehabilitation. An estimated 14 lakh families were affected, of which about 50,000 are estimated to be on the banks of our major waterways. The Honorable Chief Minister announced that all of them will be given houses. And about 10,000 of these people are already, as I speak, being moved to slumboard tenements that are already available. And the balance will be moved within the next 1 year or so. We also have waived the typical contribution for these tenements, a subsistence allowance is being given for 1 year and a one-time shifting allowance. Apart from that, we are providing skill training for livelihood protection as well as ensuring admission of their wards in schools. In terms of rehabilitation of the trades, the businesses who were badly affected, they have been given additional credit or deferral of their loan liabilities. Interest-free loans are being given to small vendors and traders. Training norms relaxed. Industrial estates have been given special attention for repairs, and damaged power meters are being replaced free of cost. Finally, restoration. Public infrastructure, apart from private assets, has been badly battered. We estimate our damage to be in the tune of about 3,000 crores, most of which the details have been given to the Government of India as part of our memorandum. A massive program for repairing these roads is currently underway. About 12,000 roads are being taken up, and I think in the next 2 months or so, we'll be able to get them back to normalcy. Critical infrastructure like power was restored as soon as the water receded, and so was drinking water. But the major problem we faced was of sewage overflows, which happened because there were blockages in the sewer system as a result of collapse of sewer lines or water entering these sewer systems. Milk supply was restored within a couple of days, as was transport services. Vegetables and provisions were made available through our cooperative outlets and ration shops. These are just some pictures of the badly damaged roads, canals, culverts in the city, and this is some pictures of how the work is now proceeding at the ward base. The Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Chief Minister carried out a review and monitoring of the flood-affected areas. The central team visited twice, and we gave memoranda. The state government appointed very senior officials to assist me in flood relief monitoring, and I'm happy to say that the entire state machinery worked in a seamless manner, jointly, and mobilized every single effort required for flood mitigation. We also took recourse to social media like WhatsApp and Twitter to reach out to people about what work we were doing, and this is the hashtag for the same. Now coming to the main issue, what are our lessons in the light of this kind of a flood, an unprecedented flood and an unprecedented response? I put up some of my ideas, and this we can discuss after I conclude. One thing that has come out very clearly is that the city governance systems to plan and to coordinate, especially at times of disaster management, need to be strengthened. The city corporation is only a coordinating agency, and unlike cities in the West, the city corporation is not the government. There are multiple agencies who participate in not just city infrastructure development and service provision, but for disaster management. For example, the water bodies, which are key to the maintenance of the water bodies, is key to the to this whole story. These water bodies continue to be maintained, as in the case in other states as well, under the State Public Works Department. These are not under the local body or the local government. Therefore, very often what happens is that despite the best of coordination, there are issues with regard to managing these water bodies, the flows, the levels, maintenance of their structures, their the reservoirs or the supply channels. The second issue is that in case of disaster, city corporations are not designed to handle disasters. We are not a rescue agency. There are specialized agencies like Fire and Rescue Services or the SDRF, the NDRF. These need to be strengthened and placed under the local body. Till now, the fire services are a separate arm of the government. They are not under the local body, which is not to say that we want to increase our turf or anything. But the idea is that there is more accountability, there is better scope for planning in case they are placed with the local body. And I mentioned that multiplicity of agencies is one of the biggest banes that Indian cities face. And the sooner we actually translate the mandate of the Constitution to empower local bodies, make them effective city governments, the better it would be for urban governance. Having talked about governance, the other issue is in terms of plans. Unfortunately, despite years of facing floods, disasters, we don't seem to learn the importance of planning, especially environmental planning. Till date, we do not have any comprehensive drainage plan for the entire region. What happens is, typically when schemes or projects are announced, we take up detailed project reports for only an area. So if a JNNURL comes, you plan for the city stormwater drain network alone, without realizing that these stormwater drain networks cannot function in isolation. They are supposed to be part of an overall network of draining, a macro drainage, which comprises reservoirs, lakes, canals. And unless you look at drainage planning in totality, there's no point in just doing a stormwater drain network project. Chennai Basin, for example, has sub-basins of the Arnia, Vasistaliyar, Adyar, Kum, Kovalam, and these have hundreds, not thousands of watersheds. We need to have a comprehensive regional plan for drainage for the entire region. And this should cover the entire gamut of macro and micro drainage under various agencies. Similarly, the micro drainage that the city corporation looks after is right now confined, as I mentioned, only to the core city. It needs to be quickly implemented in the extended areas, and already as I speak, the government have already sanctioned the project and we've started work on the extended areas. What about areas beyond the city's limits? There are any number of smaller town panchayats, village panchayats, which don't have even this basic stormwater drain network. So a lot of effort, a lot of plans, investment of resources has to happen in developing these kind of micro and macro drainage systems in an integrated manner. So the key word is integration. The third lesson which I would like to place before you is that when we go for metropolitan planning and development, we need to give primacy to environmental issues, and drainage is one of them. It's very well known that when planning bodies go for reclassification of land for urban development, and that's necessary for ensuring growth of cities and for economic growth, when we go for reclassification from agricultural use to urban use, the layout approval processes have to ensure that the developer does not get away by just building something and leaving the infrastructure development to local bodies. Actually, it should be the other way around. We should ensure that first development of infrastructure takes place. You should have the drains in place, you should have road networks, you should have drainage networks, you should have water supply in place before any developer starts developing any residential layouts or any commercial developments. Second issue is on encroachments. You cannot have a plan which cannot be enforced. It's well known that there are any number of plans, but these are not implemented. There are encroachments, there are deviations from plans. And especially encroachments on water bodies like canals and rivers, they need to be ruthlessly curbed. As I mentioned, in Chennai, the Public Works Department maintains these rivers and canals. We do the micro drainage. It is our estimation that not less than 50,000 huts are there only. And why huts? There are commercial buildings, pakka buildings which are dotting the various water bodies. These haven't happened overnight. These have been there for decades. And it's a systematic, I would say, a gross abuse of our natural resources that is responsible for these kind of calamities. Then, third issue, when you look at water, you cannot just look at storm water or rainwater alone. It has to be looked in totality. You're talking of drinking water, you're talking of wastewater. Unless you utilize wastewater, treat it fully, recycle it as far as possible through tertiary treatment, unless you look at water management as a whole, there's no point in talking about only drainage. Then there are certain individual lessons that again I want to place before this August gathering. One, we till now, despite all the technical advances, do not have a sophisticated model or a warning system. People may say that warnings were given, that there would be heavy rainfall. But imagine if we had a system which would say that if it rains X centimeter at such and such place, or if the water levels in these reservoirs are this much, there should be a model which should actually tell me as a practitioner that these areas of your city, these streets would be inundated to this level. Till date, I don't have that kind of a data. So it has to be actionable warning. It cannot be enough that you say, okay, there's going to be 30,000 cusecs being released from Chembrambaka. So what? I vacated people from the banks of the river Adyar, but I didn't know that water would go into Alvarpet. Or in Jafarkhanpet there would be 17 feet of water. Nobody imagined that. We are not scientists. So we need that kind of an input. The good news is that bodies like IIT, Anna University, and several other agencies have these models. We need to work with them. And I'm happy to say that now under the World Bank new project, we are planning to now build that kind of a system. The sooner we do in our cities, the better. Field officials, corporations, governments want actionable inputs as to where exactly, what kind of, and it's not important for governments alone, it's necessary for public. A lot of people tell me, we want warned. As a citizen, people are angry, they're annoyed because they said government didn't warn me that water would come up to 6 feet. But government even didn't know that water would be that much. Imagine a system if it can warn citizens that, okay, be prepared. Based on this model, we forecast that in the next 6 hours, you will get about 4 feet of water in this street. That would be something which citizens would appreciate. Our disaster relief guidelines, they need to be revised. I realized one thing. We were distributing relief material just as it came. Somebody gave me Maggi biscuits, Maggi noodles, we started distributing Maggi. Next day somebody gave some other item, we started giving. There should be a standardized disaster kit. Okay, if there is a disaster, immediately these items should be given to the public. These kind of relief guidelines should be there. There should be adequate stock. Communication, we felt, was one of the biggest weak points. And what we need is a fail-safe communication system, whether it's mobile phones or internet or wireless services. Another learning was media management, especially social media, for proper information dissemination. Then there is a huge scope for citizen engagement because we found that there was enormous amount of voluntary effort. Amazing. Unfortunately, most of it is non-coordinated. Therefore, there is scope for engaging citizens and to coordinate their activities. And finally, I feel there is a need to document each and every such experience. We are very poor at documentation. We need to document it. I've been systematically collecting all the data, and now I hope to put it together as a document which hopefully will be useful for future my successors and other cities who can use this data for responding to the disaster. So I close at this. I thank you, and I apologize again profusely to Alvaria that I just overshot, because I thought this was a story that needed to be told. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So without taking any more time, I open this to comments and questions. Because our time is limited, I request everyone to be very brief and precise on your question or comment. Yes, please, and do introduce yourself.
A lot of good things have been mentioned about this 200 relief. And I'm Katpalia from Alternative Futures. We plan for the future, that is 2050 and others. Now the question is, in all towns there is no urbanization planning. So much of congestion. All low-lying areas are occupied and therefore they flood and the damage is much more. It is there that number one condition of preventing floods should be there. Prevention means the floods are diverted and used in a proper manner, and that can be done only by a multidisciplinary team which does not exist in any state, in any department. So those are the things which need number one priority to be done for everyone, so that we can go higher up but not spread lower down.
Thank you. Please.
Myself, Kapur from JK Organization.
Basically, in urban planning, the 50 years flood level and 100 years flood level, it is a very standard practice. And as a society, not as a government or someone, we have lost this basic historical foolproof methods. Even Bombay faced this one, Chennai faced. So we should have that clear-cut mark, 50-year flood level, 100-year. And if people are living, see, due to population pressure in India, people may live due to the poverty, everything. But they should know that this is a 50 to 100 years, and sometime in their life, it will happen.
Thank you.
I'm Gulmohar from Business Standard. I just wanted to know, you say that all management of natural resources, including water bodies, should be brought within the corporation. And one of the ideas that you gave was that even in DRF, do you think municipal corporations have the ability to handle that sort of an expansion of their scope?
Good question. Yes, please.
Yeah. Good evening, I'm Uday from NIUA. My question is that you mentioned that water supply and sewerage system were affected during the floods. So, could you please indicate within how many days the systems were in place? And secondly, what was the extent of damage in terms of rupees to these two sectors, water supply and sanitation sector? That I have. Thank you.
Yes, please.
My name is Kamalji. I have a very simple question. The media reports you haven't brought out, what the media said, why it happened. And it says that there were encroachments on the waterways, water didn't go well. So let me put it my question. India has got very good laws, but the problem is implementation. Those laws are not implemented. And you, Mr. Kapur, you are one of the implementers. Right? Let me put it this way. All these government implementers have got a very good secure job. Once they get into the service, they are there for lifetime. Why that security should not be removed? You should be on contract, right? And from the service. And all the wrong decisions taken by you. If you are responsible for those encroachments and not removal, not implementation of that law, you should be removed from the service, right?
Thank you.
All the decisions, projects you have cleared wrongly on the water bodies, they should be in audit.
Yeah, your point is
found
taken.
out, okay,
Yeah.
you cleared the wrong project.
Thank
and
you.
you should be removed from service.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, my name is Sudeshna Chatterjee. I'm an urban designer. The current Chennai master plan, in its chapter on disaster management, actually talks about that Chennai, or in fact in that area of Tamil Nadu, actually has no flood risks. And then it goes on to say that there should be certain area-based studies done around the Adiyar River basin and the other major rivers, etc. So it's actually quite shocking to see the level of ignorance that's embedded within the master plan of the city. In the light of this current flooding, is there any attempt being made to integrate flood level flood plans projected up to 2030, which is the vision for the master plan, and update and sort of delete these sort of anomalies within the plan itself?
My name is Karthik. I'm from Chennai, so this talk was very interesting. Thank you so much. So the question that I had was, for all the translations that have happened on part of real estate developers and perhaps in cahoots with the government or whatever it is, where construction has come up in a big way on water bodies and other areas, what are the measures that you propose to ensure that there's no loss to all the investment that's already happened there, right? So it's very difficult to evacuate people from there and tell them, you know what, you're going to raise this building or that, you're going to move up. These are high-income people, in many parts of Chennai that you're aware of. So that's something that I think needs to be worked on because a lot of that has already happened. So what is the quick action plan on that side? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Suman. Again, like Karthik, just Madrasi, born and raised and all that. I wanted to ask about the future. Currently, or at least until recently, a couple of water catchment areas were being used as garbage dumping grounds. I'd like to know how Chennai's plan for disposing waste and solid garbage is going to change so that we don't actually use up spaces that are supposed to, be used as water catchment areas.
Yeah, my name is Frank Samuel from GIZ, and I'm a bit astonished that this issue of climate change and the risks which result from increasing issues of climate change have not been really mentioned. And well, I myself come from a city which had a flooding which was called a flood once in 1,000 years, 10 years ago in Germany. There was a big discussion about what does it mean for the future city development, what would be adequate reactions, which risks do we have to take into consideration that such events may happen more frequently in the future. And I think you have stated very clearly that in Chennai this has been quite an exceptional flooding. You have had obviously quite an amazing response, but I think you also need to be prepared that this risk will increase in the future, that they may happen more often. And the question is, what are the strategies you will apply for these
We'll take
confront
a
this risk?
second round. So, Vikram, can you address these?
I'll take these questions in the order in which they came. Mr. Patwalia mentioned about the fact that most of the cities, towns, they don't have any urbanization planning. I agree that a lot of cities require planning, and not just plans, these need to be updated frequently. Chennai, for example, it had its first master plan in 1975. The second one happened in 2008. And whereas statutorily every plan has to be updated every 10 years. So yes, we need to really work on towns preparing the urban plans, and a very important component of this planning is how to ensure that flood protection, prevention happens. So that's an integral part of these plans. I fully agree with you that that's the need of the hour, and all governments, state governments need to work on this. And urbanization, as you know, is something which is happening at such a fast pace. And today, I think practically about cities, states like Tamil Nadu, half the population is urbanized. And it's a matter of time before India would also be facing these kind of numbers. Of course, Dr. Aluwalia has done a lot of work on this. I think the sooner we realize that India is on the cusp of massive urbanization, the better. I agree with Mr. Kapur. He said about the need for data. I can show you that a lot of these DPRs that go into preparing these plans actually take into account data from various sources. But yes, we still need to verify the integrity of this data, and every time these episodes happen, we need to ensure that all this information is captured in our future plans. I perfectly agree with you that that's very key. Somebody mentioned from Business Standard that the management of water bodies, I had mentioned that should be brought under the city's control, and so as well as rescue agencies, and whether corporation has the capacity. Yes, presently maybe we do not, but we need to build capacity. And that's what the constitutional mandate is about, to strengthen city governments. You have to continuously build these capacities. The gentleman from NIUA had specifically mentioned about water supply and sanitation. To be frank, I don't handle this subject. There is a separate board for this. I'm sure they will be able to give you more information. But I can tell you that they had a real task on hand. The estimation was that nearly about 3,000 different places they had complaints of the sewer system getting clogged or collapsed. And they did a phenomenal job of restoring it. As of now, I don't think there is any issue except for a few stubborn spots where the works are going on, where the lines completely collapsed. So that work is going on. Numbers, I don't have it, but I can come back to you on this. Someone mentioned about media reports on encroachments and implementers not being accountable. I fully agree with you that there has to be accountability in government. As civil servants, we are accountable to the elected government and the government in turn to the legislature. And definitely those people who have failed to check these encroachments must face the action under their departmental rules and under law. Then there was this question on the master plan, which Mr. Sudeshna, I think, who says that, she said that the master plan says there is no flood risk. I need to check this out. I'm sure you've read it better than I have. But I'm sure that we need to revise this master plan after this particular episode. And as I mentioned in the previous question, these master plans need to be periodically updated. That's the danger. If we just keep sitting with this master plan for the next 3 decades, we are not doing service to the. But because based on this master plan only, all the detailed development plans have to be built. So I fully agree with you that we need to have a relook at it. Mr. Karthik mentioned about the construction on water bodies and how to now get around them now that investments have been made. See, I want to clarify one thing. We cannot say that all developments that have happened on the erstwhile water bodies or on the erstwhile low-lying areas are encroachments. Normally, whenever any construction is allowed by the planning body, they go through a process of ensuring that the reclassification is done in a transparent manner, and more importantly, they provide for drainage. The problem is that when the developers actually develop, they hardly ever provide the drainage. Now, what we can do in these areas is to see that where those drains need to be built, they need to be built, and they need to be integrated with existing drainage networks. So it's not that all is lost. You still can salvage the situation by ensuring that proper drainage is built around these developments. Someone mentioned about the dumping of garbage. I think you're referring to 2 of our dumping grounds. One is the Perangudi and the Kodanguru. The Perangudi one is actually located almost next to the marshland. Maybe in good old days it was part of the marsh. But we don't have any alternative right now to shift these dump yards. But there is a plan to close it systematically after a processing plant comes up. And we are more than concerned than anybody to ensure that the wasteland, the marshland is protected. So it's a commitment by the corporation that yes, in due course this will be shut down and a processing plant set up so that the marshland is protected. And yes, we should not be allowing local bodies to dump garbage on catchment areas or water bodies.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about capacity? Is one processing plant enough to manage all of Chennai and suburban Chennai's?
We planned for 2, sir. We planned 2, and there are now technologies available. We generate about 5,000 metric tons of garbage. We planned for 2 plants of capacity of about 2,500 to 3,000 MTs, which is possible. And it requires a much less footprint. And hopefully that should take care of, along with segregation, take care of the garbage in the city. The detailed project reports are available. We can share it with you. The gentleman from GIZ is bang on when he says that this is a big wake-up call. This is exactly climate change happening, and yes, we need to address the risks which are going to happen in the future. I'm happy to say that we've recently signed up with 100 RC, Resilient Cities Network, and hopefully with their help and the learnings from similar networks across the world, we should be actually coming out with better strategies for resilience planning. Thank you.
As we open the second round, let me put a couple of questions to you, Vikram. You said that micro drainage should be with the city government, and then you also said that we need to connect with micro drainage. Now, what do you see? What is the institutional framework within which micro drainage can be connected with macro drainage, and are our metropolitan planning committees, can they play any role in bringing this about? That's one. And the second question is that you also said that really one needs holistic approach where you look at wastewater treatment and solid waste management. And at the same time, you also admitted that it's your metro board that takes care of sewage treatment and solid waste management. So how can the city really handle a challenge like this, should it happen again, if you don't have control over all the elements of this circuit? There are a few other questions.
Yeah. So I have
No, I think let us collect here.
So I have a two-part question. The first, and I'm one of the volunteers. So my first question was, we heard reports that even the Navy, for example, they were waiting for permission to deploy their activities in Chennai. So is there a plan to centralize this authority that needs to, sort of approve these moves on the ground during disaster relief? And the second question I have is, I was part of a social media network that actually handled many calls because I was in Delhi at the time. We were able to reach people in Chennai faster. So when you said social media management, how is it that we can actually come on board? You mentioned that you want to manage this better, but do you have something whereby we can directly coordinate with you? Because that was one of the biggest issues. We just didn't know whom to refer to credibly.
I'm Yashaswini. I'm also from Chennai and with the same volunteer network. My question is, during this disaster, at least the first 3-4 days, all the emergency services came to a standstill, hospitals, crematoriums, and the number of calls we received for oxygen cylinders or ambulances, generators, where people's lives were at stake was just overwhelming. How do you plan for something like that? How do you plan for emergency services?
May I just make a small follow-up? So the 5 of us are part of the social media, amongst many others, part of the social media team that was here in Delhi and managed to help out with the volunteer effort. We also have a lot of data and feedback that we'd like to share and we'd like to work with you on. So if there's any way we can constructively reach out to you, please let us know and we'd be happy to.
Shamla Mani from NIUA. I just was referring to 3 media reports which kind of contradicted to what you were saying. One was that, you said that the IMD's predictions were not accurate. I remember that I'm from Chennai, so I have relatives in Chennai. So I remember that on 30th night when we were watching television and it said that 30 to 50 centimeters, and I remember frantically ringing up my aunt and asking, that time the telephone was still working, and there was indication to an extent that it was going to be heavy rainfall, it's going to be almost 30 to 50 centimeters, and I myself remember that I had that indication and I called. So, I mean, to say that IMD did not inform, that was one thing. Second is that, you said that there were no casualties. But I don't know, from my friends and relatives, I heard that there were at least 1,000 fatalities. And also, the media reports about, media reports about, how the Chembrambakam entire thing was handled. I mean, we are relying only on media reports. I'm not saying anything about anybody. It's just that it said that, the people at the Chembrambakam reservoir, they requested permission to release it when it was only 900 cusecs. And it was delayed to such an extent that it became 29,000 cusecs. And, and that too, it was released at in the middle of the night, and, people drowned in their beds. This is what we heard. I mean, we would like you to clarify. We totally rely on what you are saying.
Thank you. Professor Gusai.
Gusai from IIT Delhi. I think it's more of a comment than a question. Some of the things which have been mentioned about how we should really do the planning at not at the micro level only, but at the macro level also. I'd like to share some of the things which we are doing in that direction. With the Ministry of Water Resources, we are looking at some of the basins to plan the basins as a single unit, and then all these things will come in as sub areas of what needs to be done at the reservoir level, how we need to operate. I've seen invariably we are having forecasts from the Indian Meteorological Department. They have started giving the quantitative forecast for the next 7 days. and they are at a grid size of around 9 by 9 kilometer. And that's quite a good grid size where they are giving the quantitative forecast. One example which we have taken is we are making the forecast for the city of Surat, and is already implemented for the last 3 years. And they have seen that it has given them a lot of advantage in terms of knowing a priori beforehand how much water is going to come into the reservoir, so that the regulation from the reservoir can be done in a manner that you are not sending a very big peak towards the end. So you can start releasing the water from the reservoir in lieu of what you're going to get, so that by the end of the event, your reservoir should be full. That is the bottom line. Similarly, for Delhi, you mentioned about the modeling. Yes, we have already been working on Delhi space in terms of creating the models where we can tell beforehand which is the area which is going to get inundated and by how much with respect to some of the known rainfalls events. One more thing which is important is that in the country, many of the rivers which are getting inundated or which are getting major concerns about the floods is not the local rainfall. They are riverine floods which are entering these systems, these cities, whether it's Delhi, whether it's even Srinagar, Chennai is another case, where the water is coming from outside. So I think what we need at the country level, which we have not done so far, though when I talked to the Standard Water Commission chairman, he said that they had given an advisory to every state that we must have a floodplain zoning maps. Floodplain zoning has not been done, where all those areas which are in the floodplains, people should know when they are going to buy the land, that what is the risk they are incurring by taking a land into these areas, which is part of the encroachment. So it's a very systematic encroachment which is taking place. That we need to avoid, and can be avoided through making the floodplain zoning maps and making it public for all the rivers which have this tendency of getting flooded. And any person who's really interested in, we are having a talk on 9th of February, and I'm going to share in general what we are doing for Delhi, what kind of modeling is taking place, and what will be the outcome of that, what we'll expect after we've done the modeling of various areas, various basins. As Delhi is composed of 3 major basins. Nazargarh is one, the Barakulla is another one, and East Delhi, that portion is a separate area. And interestingly, East Delhi is the one which is a total encroachment of the floodplain of Yemen. And it's done through the society. And now, whenever the flood comes, that is the area which gets the chances of flooding the first. And many of the areas we are still encroaching, where the water comes. If you go to the barrage, this Okla barrage, the Jadpur area, people encroached. We brought the embankment before that encroachment. The next level, again, an encroachment took place. We again brought the embankments further down. So with that, the constriction of the river is taking place. The same flood which would have passed at a particular level, now the same flood, if it comes again, it will be passing at a higher level. And it has a much more dangerous situation for the flooding of those areas if there is a beach. So I think these are some of the issues where the technology can play a role. We have the models available. It's a question of using them properly and in an integrated manner, not only at the micro level, but also looking at the other issues simultaneously.
Yeah, I see 2 hands here, so please, you had a chance, maybe 1 seconds later on, there were 2 here and 2 here, quickly, be brief.
My name is Preeta, I'm from Dalberg and working very closely with Mr. Kapur and his team on the 100 Resilient Cities initiative. I just had 2 questions. One was in relation to what the lady from NIUA also referred to. Are there currently any guidelines about when the release of waters from reservoirs can be approved? And who are the clear approval authorities? And in the specific case, your first slide was very graphic in terms of the levels of rainfall. So was there any scope to have released the waters in phases, say, over November, if that was allowed? So what are the guidelines around it? The second question is, you clearly presented a a lot of interesting facts about how the corporation was able to come to the fore very quickly in terms of rescue, relief, rehabilitation. But if I were to ask you going forward, learning from the lessons from this incident, what might be, say, 3 or 4 capacities where if you had the ability to enhance the capabilities of the corporation today for Chennai, what might they be? So in terms of, say, people who are interested in helping the corporation improve its current abilities or capabilities, what might be the top 3 or 4 capabilities you'd like to enhance?
I am KRG Naya. I used to be a professor of business economics in Delhi University and have specialized in regional development. I have 2 small questions. I watched Delhi grow slowly into a small urban slum. One reason for this is vote bank based induced migration. That possibly happened also in Chennai. Now add to that the real estate money lobby based encroachments. Maybe that added to the woes of Chennai. And I am sure that some of the areas which were flooded would not have been passed by any sensible urban planner for building. The second question, one small question please. The second question is, I am all for decentralized participatory urban planning, but I am a little worried about the capacity, expertise to do so. And also, I have first-hand experience that the lower down the level of administration, the higher the level of corruption. Your feedback?
Shruti, from Chennai also, I'm working in a research organization here. I was wondering also from the presentation that the data that you speak of is sort of disaggregated. There's water, there's pollution, and planning. So I was wondering, as part of the strategy that you're coming up with, would it also involve creating a platform to share data across different bodies and networks that could help both urban planners and the government in creating disaster city resilient plans? Also, speaking of plans, when do you think we can expect this plan to, come into force and when we can actually see it?
Yeah, what?
Just one last question.
Even here, if you notice, a lot of people's questions are based on reports, rumors, etc. Do you think communication during the entire floods would have been a lot better and proactive in dosing these rumors? And what do you think you can change going forward in terms of communication during such emergencies or floods?
Good evening, sir. This is Roma. I'm from JNU. Sir, I just want to ask you that there are many people who are more vulnerable. Like the vulnerable category also differs from a particular categories. So how do you deal with different categories of people who are more vulnerable, and how the communication of these, how the communication flows also, reach these people, and how do different people, come to line with that? So how do you deal with it?
Okay, the very last.
Yeah, good evening to all of you. I am Arun Kumar from the Bureau of Indian Standards, Civil Engineering Department. I just have few points to be made here, that we have the National Building Code of India, which says for all buildings, the plinth level of the building should be X meters above the local flood level. That is one. Second thing, why don't we slowly bring in the concept of home insurance, wherein the homeowners would also be pitching in their money to safeguard against all these disasters. Third thing, the fixing up of road level. Road levels are being changed quite often, say every 2 years or so. What happens is the houses go well below the road level. 10 years back it was the other way. Houses were above the road level, it has changed now. The last one, the website of the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister Relief Fund, when he tried to contribute money into it, unfortunately on the December 5th, the site could not be opened because it was hacked. Anyway, I could pitch in some of my contribution to my friends at Salem and Hosur areas. That's it, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to start with your intervention, where you had talked about a couple of issues. One is on the role of, we really don't have the benefit of its planning role or its coordination role. At the moment, the micro drainage, which is under the corporation, and the macro, which is under the Public Works Department, they are integrated. Geographically, they are integrated. But functionally, yes, there leaves a lot to be desired. As I mentioned, that there are coordination issues. That's why my suggestion was that as far as the city is concerned, we need to bring both macro and micro under one umbrella. And to me, in view of the constitutional mandate, there is no better organization than the city government. Yes, smaller local bodies may have capacity issues, but when we are talking of large metropolises like Delhi or Chennai or Mumbai, I'm sure we can develop those capacities if they are not there. But sometimes there is a very, I would say, a grey line between micro and what is micro. For example, I do maintain some of the canals, and so does the PWD. And there is no clear-cut definition as to which canal, why somebody has been maintaining. So therefore, it would make everybody's life much easier if the entire drainage, whether macro or micro, is brought under the city control. But having said that, there is still this problem of the macro drainage outside the city. There is a metropolitan plan which is prepared by the planning authority like the CMDA. And even beyond the metropolitan limits, you have a region which willy-nilly is contributing to my flooding. And therefore, there is a need for such a kind of a metropolitan council, as we talked about, which can actually plan for these kind of, in fact, there is a demand that the CMDA should not be restricted only to the metropolitan region. It should go into regional planning, so that these kind of regional plans actually allow us to take into account these kind of, for example, drainage basins, how they impact on our sub-basins. So I agree that, yes, this is one area we need to work on, and not just Chennai. I think all cities, all metropolitan cities need to activate these kind of planning committees or councils, so to say. And with regard to water planning, I mentioned this because I find that very often, Chennai is a classic case, and I'm sure Delhi must be also having the same issues, where you have a city corporation that handles the micro drainage, whereas you have the Jal Board or the Metro Water which handles the sewerage. And what's happening is, sometimes my drains are doubling up as a sewerage system. So when the capacity of the sewerage system is inadequate or there are some blockages, people tend to let out their sewerage into my stormwater drains. And that compromises on the drain's capacity to carry flood waters. So what happens is all the muck that comes in gets silted up, and it becomes very difficult to reseal these drains to allow them to drain out waters. Same way, during times of floods, what happened was, since my drains were not able to carry that much water, people were actually puncturing the manholes of the metro water, opening up the manholes and allowing the water to go through the sewer network. And that created problems for the sewer network, because all the grime, the stones, plastic, garbage, everything went and clogged the sewerage systems, and then you started having the sewerage backflows. These are all integrated. Whether you like it or not, we don't live in a perfect world. There is always a possibility of one affecting the other. Therefore, there is need for one agency which can handle both these. And if you can prevent water from entering into the sewerage system by properly recycling it or allowing it to be reused, you reduce the load not just on the sewerage system but also on my stormwater drain network. Or let's say there's another example, I'd like to just digress a bit. A lot of times we find that the sewage which is untreated is let out into the water bodies, through my drains, into the canals, into the rivers. What happens is, these water bodies become fertile breeding grounds for things like water hyacinth or allowing the growth of vectors. And that is the reason why, let's say, mosquito problem is there in most of our cities. And we've experienced it. The moment we started removing all the weeds and the floating garbage or cleaned up these rivers, the mosquito problem almost vanished in these areas. So therefore, these are all integrated, and therefore there is a need for a comprehensive planning at a city level and implementation. One agency responsible for all cities' problems, whether it's drainage or vector control or wastewater treatment, all these need to be brought under one umbrella. I couldn't agree with you more, ma'am, that we need to integrate these. Coming to the questions by the audience, Mr. Raghu mentioned about Navy waiting to be deployed. This is again one of these myths that keep generating through the media, social media. I have not heard of. We are in regular touch. My state government, the State Relief Commissioner, was in regular touch with the Air Force, Navy. In fact, in one case, what had happened was we had asked for the assets of the Air Force to be deployed. I was in touch with the concerned officer sitting in Kapur because the airfield in Chennai was flooded, so the choppers were all there. They could not fly because the weather couldn't permit it. And there were people waiting to be rescued, but they could not deploy because the weather didn't permit. So they said, you have to wait till tomorrow for the choppers to be deployed. And as regards the Navy, I think there was absolutely no issues. We were regularly in touch with them, and this is news to me that where the Navy was waiting to be deployed. In fact, Navy was deployed. Of course, not in such numbers as the Army and the NDRF, but I would like to disagree with this insinuation. You also mentioned, Mr. Raghu, about the social media management and how civil society can participate, pitch in. Absolutely, we welcome this. In fact, this has been one big learning. We were very poor on social media management. In fact, we didn't even have a Twitter account or a Facebook page, and hardly anybody listened to all our press releases or to the media. I now realize that especially the younger generation actually looks to only the social media for all the news and alerts and all. So learning this midway through, we immediately put together a team. There were people like you who came in to help me, and we immediately set up Resilient Chennai hashtag along with the Facebook page, and because of that we were able to kind of communicate at least and listen into what people were saying. In fact, one of the team was actually doing the listening for information I can share with you. We had a team which was actually listening into the tweets that were going around, what kind of, what were people talking about in the social media, and then giving us the feedback. I wish we had started this earlier. It's a learning. I think going forward, this should become standard practice. Ms. Shasmani, you mentioned about all emergency services came to a standstill. Yes, I mentioned it in my presentation. Because who are the people who man these emergency services? They are the workers, and when they are own houses on their own, you can't expect them to come and report for duty. None of my workers came, the drivers were missing, the police constables couldn't come, everyone was marooned. So therefore, it was an emergency, it was an unprecedented situation. Yes, generators were in short supply because electricity board had to shut down power to prevent any kind of electrocution or short circuiting. Naturally, oxygen levels also. But the problem was, while people were sending out SOSs, how do you reach out to people? I had a problem, I couldn't even talk to my field officials because the communications were all down. None of the cell phones were working. I mean, I can just share with you one instance. BSNL, their whole exchange was flooded and they didn't have a generator. And for 2 days they were running around for a generator. If they had approached us, maybe we could have helped them. For 2 days, there was half the city was down because the BSNL services were affected. Similarly, other service providers, they were all, I don't know why they were located very near the rivers. All their basements were flooded. Everybody had generators or their panel rooms in the basements. So communications was down. That is why we could not respond. It's not that there was lack of generators or lack of oxygen. Everything is available. But the people who need to move these were not available, or the communication networks were down. So that was one learning, that we need to concentrate on communication. Another colleague of yours mentioned about the data. Yes, we have a lot of data now. We would be happy to share. We earlier worked with the Chennai data portal team with the CAG, and we did a lot of work on using data for policy making. We would like to work again. I will be happy to share your numbers, share my numbers with you and take your coordinates so that we can work on this. Ms. Shamla, you mentioned about a lot of media reports. Anyway, it's my word against what the media says. I can assure you there was no IMD forecast of saying how much they didn't quantify. And this was very clearly brought out, of course, after a few days by the state government. There was actually the same media also gave out the press release and an interview by the Chief Secretary and senior officers of the government. I think you might have listened into that as well. When they explained the whole Chandrambakam and the flooding issue, it was very clearly mentioned by the Chief Secretary himself that there was no numbers or in terms of 30 centimeter or 50 centimeter given out by any weather agency. Maybe some rumor may have floated here and there saying it's going to be there. But Chandrambakam issue, it was very clearly given out by a press release and by the media briefing given by the senior officers of the government. And I'll summarize it for your benefit, because what clearly was mentioned by the government was, and this would also incidentally answer somebody else's question about, is there any standard protocol for releases, you asked. Yes, there is a protocol. There is a standard operating procedure of the PWD which says that water level, if it reaches 90% of the level, it should be released in such a manner. And permission is not required at any level. The local executive engineer can take a decision. It was done. This was clarified by the government. But all I want to say is the amount of rainfall that fell in those days was so humongous. It is far, far more than the capacity of Chembrambakam. Even assuming for argument's sake that we had forget about reducing it to 75% level. Even if the entire lake had been emptied 2-3 days in advance, I can assure you, you can do the math, I can show you, in a matter of few hours, the whole lake would have been filled up. That was the quantum of water. So all we could have done by even emptying the lake much in advance was to have slightly delayed this deluge. But deluge would have happened. It was a foregone conclusion after that rain, with almost 10 TMC plus of water coming in. What would a Chembrambakam with a half or 1 TMC of water, what could it happen? This was very clearly brought out in the government. Unfortunately, we are very selective in what we hear in media, because I want to place it on record that government acted in utmost responsibility in the releases. And with regard to casualties, I don't know where these numbers of 1,000 and all come. Again, as I say, it is our word for theirs. I can give you down to the last number as to how many casualties have happened. In Chennai, it was less than 100. District-wise figures are available. It's not in thousands. When I mentioned there were no casualties, I mentioned that the day the water was released, we evacuated more than 30,000 people from the banks of the river Adyar without a single casualty. I didn't say that casualties didn't happen. Yes, casualties happened in some areas where people got trapped and unfortunately lost their lives. Some people slipped and went. But I mentioned in the context of rescuing people. And despite not being a rescuing agency, this is the point I'm making, because the rescuing agencies came only the next day. Professor Gusain, I fully agree with you that we need to work on such kind of models. I'm happy to note that Delhi and Surat, they have these exemplars which we can learn from, and that the IMD is also going to come out with quantitative forecast which would be much more reliable and dependable. Again, but I reiterate that these models need to actually translate into something which is actionable. It still will not help me if it says that, okay, you will get 30 centimeters of rain, or if somebody tells me that you will release 30,000 cusecs from Chembrambakam. It doesn't make sense to me unless I know which of my streets are going to get flooded to what level. Only if I know that kind of thing, I can warn people, ask to evacuate. So unless these models take that kind of a forecast, it may not be of so much of use as is contemplated. And yes, definitely these floodplain zone mappings would be extremely useful so that people can make informed choices. Even planning bodies, when they give permissions and all, they can keep that into account before they go in for plan approvals. So this is an extremely good suggestion. I'm sure we'll carry it to the planning authority, in our case, the Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority. Prita, I think I've answered part of your questions, but with regard to what are the capacities that we need, I think you have to help us, as part of the 100 RC network. But off the cuff, I can say one is city governments, city municipalities don't have the expertise for disaster management. It's good to say, okay, you are responsible for disaster management, but we don't have an institutional memory. We are, birds of paradise. I'll come and go. My staff will get retired. People will move on. Since we don't document it properly, disaster doesn't happen every year. It happens once in a while. The last time it happened was 10 years ago. The people who handled that disaster are all long and gone. So therefore, we need to have a system that documents and continuously trains people in disaster management. A lot of our engineers may be excellent civil or electrical or mechanical engineers, but they are not disaster experts. So we need that kind of management capacity. Second one which I can think of is what these ladies and the gentlemen mentioned, media management, communication. That's one thing that we lack. We don't disseminate information. We are not very, I would say, media savvy. And in fact, those of you who saw me on television, I think for us also it was a new experience because we've normally been very reticent in talking to the media, but learning from experience, I think this is something which every government, state, municipality should be doing, is to engage with media, with the citizens in a more proactive manner. And we try to do a good job of it, but I think we need more training in how to handle media, especially social media. We are able to handle the print and the audiovisual media, but social media is a complete new ball game. Of course, we are all on WhatsApp, by the way. All my officers, all down to my lower staffs, we massively used WhatsApp to share information with each other and communicate and all. But when it comes to Twitter and Facebook, I think we need to learn from you. Okay. So that's, and Mr. Nair, you had mentioned about, vote bank politics and migration as being one of the reasons. I think I couldn't really understand how urban planners don't allow migration or any kind of, this kind of habitations to take place. Urban planners are fairly, I would say it would have happened despite the urban planners, recommendations.
It has actually happened.
Okay. Maybe I'm not very knowledgeable about Delhi. But on decentralization, I again reiterate the point that there is no other alternative. Yes, we may not have capacities, but we need to build it. How long can we, keep depending on parastatals? We need to build capacity in this development. Mr. Shruti, you had talked about data, creating a platform for sharing. Absolutely, I'm with you. We need to be more open, allow more people to work on this data and help us prepare responses. I don't know when this plan will come out. I just put out what I think should be done. Maybe my successor will take it up, and there are a lot of players in a government. There is a planning authority, there are other parastatals that need to work on it. But I'm not a soothsayer, but the sooner this plan comes in and it's implemented, the better. Somebody, again, a colleague of yours could have talked about communication. I agree with you. We initially faltered, but we tried to make it up, again with the help of civil society and volunteer groups and some companies. I can even name one of them, HCL. They came in a big way. Incidentally, my 1913 helpline, it collapsed because of flood of calls. When the water entered into a server room, I want to place on record the help given by companies like HCL, who set up within 24 hours a parallel helpline with some 30 call center executives, and it was up and going. So I salute all the people who actually contributed to helping us. In fact, my whole office was flooded. There was 3 feet of water, and we had to actually go by boat to the server room. Ms. Roma, you mentioned about vulnerable people. Yes, we do appreciate that there are groups which require special attention. In fact, that's what the government has been doing in trying to provide them the relief and rehabilitation measures. But there are other vulnerable groups, typically lower middle income families, for whom there is virtually no relief. They've lost whatever assets they have. For them, the only assets would have been a cupboard full of clothes, or maybe a mixer grinder, or a table fan, which is gone. Now, who will replace that for them? Who will compensate them? 5,000 rupees is no compensation. It may help maybe somebody at the bottom of the pyramid maybe to some extent. But what about these groups for whom the loss is far more than what the government can compensate? So we need, I think somebody mentioned about this wonderful suggestion about trying to insure people. I think insurance is one of the best ways to get around this. Home insurance, asset insurance needs to be, I think, taken much more seriously. I think we'll be working with insurance companies to come out with products. The NBC code, yes, I'm aware that pins have to be higher, but as you know, as in the case of most of the laws, they are more flouted than, but unless you have flood levels defined, how can you then, go for designing what should be the pins? And yes, it's a fact that as years have passed, road levels have gone up and the houses levels have actually relatively gone down. But that's because most of the cities, most of the towns don't have the concept of milling roads. We've just now started last year this concept of milling, and we've done it only in our bus route roads or arterial roads. Interior roads, still there's not enough resources. And second, the capacity within the industry to do milling on such a massive scale. Now today, I have to repair 12,000 roads. If I were to wait for milling equipment to come and do, it will take me 3 years. Immediate necessity is to get the roads repaired. So what do? We'll put another layer. That's what's happening year after year, which is why the levels are going up. But I fully agree with you that we need to put a check to this. And finally, I'm not aware of the website of the relief fund being, maybe it was briefly down because of communication problems or hacked, I don't know. It's fine. It's fine, thank you so much.
Well,
I have one suggestion.
I think, now we are way past our time. I just want to thank Mr. Kapur for a very candid engagement. I request Mr. Rakesh Kakkar, Director of India Habitat Center, to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, let me also add my word of thanks to Vikram for having come all the way from Chennai and put together this mass of information. What I particularly liked was that old map of Chennai. It's impossible for us who lived in Chennai to think that Nungambakam was the lakes of Chennai in that lake. It's a very valuable map that you've got, apart from the other valuable facts and data that you put together so painstakingly. Let me also thank all the members of the audience for having come and participated so enthusiastically in this discussion. I think we've all collectively gained. And last but not least, let me thank Dr. Aluwalia and her team in ICRIER for having sustained this series of urban conversations. It's now almost 2 years, and I think with each particular conversation we are gathering more steam. We normally do this once in 2 months, but because of availability of speakers, etc., we are having our next session on February 2nd. That is on the very topical session of air pollution. And we have Mr. Jaydhar Gupta, who's very different from our normal speakers. He's an activist and also an entrepreneur. So he'll be talking to us on what he thinks we should be doing for air pollution. So those of you who are living in Delhi and not luckily in Chennai, who want to know what to do about the air pollution here, please do come. Thank you.